Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Dees, and joining me today is Greta Dare.
Good evening.
It is evening.
It is. Late night talks with Wesley Dees and Greta Dare.
So, yeah, we are having to really squeeze this in at the late hour. Things have just been so crazy lately with schedules and things that are going on. We've got our first SHI Summit of 2019 that happens tomorrow or today when this podcast comes out. But I'm actually in Cocoa Beach, Florida, getting ready for, we did
jealous.
Site. I know you are. We did our site visit today, second site visit today at Kennedy Space Center to make sure all that stuff was taken care of and getting everything ready. So excited about that. And unfortunately, Greta couldn't join the team on this one. So
as I weep into my pillow. Was anybody more excited about this one? Because I feel like it's empirically false that anybody was more excited than this or than me.
More than you? Yeah. I mean, you're such of a nerd when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Wow. All right. So, you know what? I'll take that. It's a badge. It's a badge of honor, sir. Carry on.
No, but really excited about that. We've, the team's been here today getting ready for that. Super excited. And we've got another one right around the corner in just another month in Cincinnati. So if you haven't registered yet, make sure you go and register.
Go get it done.
It's been pretty exciting. Really excited about where we've come since October, especially the market analysis that we do with Axiometrics, and Grace Hill has helped put together that learning module. We've actually got it down to about 2 hours now, and super excited to go through that and continue to work on that through this series of summits. And then who knows what we're going to do next. I'm pushing for budgets, but we'll see what happens.
You know what? I haven't actually talked about anything in regards to that. And I know that's not what we're supposed to be talking about on this. So I just want to say this really quickly is that I really, obviously I was there for North Carolina, and the market analysis, just coming from the perspective of somebody who, obviously I've worked as a general manager, I've worked on site, and, then, coming from the perspective, just actually, I'm just going to leave it at that perspective. That's where I'm going to leave it. But to be at that position and to be given that amount of time to really dig into your market and to be given those tools and that information and to really go hard at it I love it so much. I love that you worked with Axiometrics. I love that, you worked with Grace Hill to really get that involvement in there. And I think that it's such a valuable portion of the summit. And, there's so much great stuff that occurs at the summits. And obviously the idea presentations, those are incredible. But the market analysis is just from an on-site team member's perspective. It isn't something that you necessarily really get to do. And there's so many different takeaways and so many areas of the business that it's applicable to. And it makes your success that much more attainable by truly understanding your market. So I haven't said that before. I wanted to slide that in there. So that's me doing that.
Yeah, no, it hasn't been easy. I'll put it that way. And the folks at Grace Hill and Axiometrics that we've been involved with know what I mean when I say that. But I think I still think there's some additional improvement that we can do, but it's really, at this point, it's hearing the feedback from the folks that are sitting in that workshop. And of course, the summit's not just about the workshop. It's also about networking with other folks that are in or near your market in your general area, making contacts with them as well as the sponsors and the vendors that are there, and of course our idea presentations. I mean, that's the really exciting part.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't wait for the folks to see the ones that we're doing at this summit when they see it on YouTube. One of them is with Willie Butler, who's a training developer at Asset Living, and he's actually releasing a book this summer on student housing called Releasing.
Nice.
And yeah. And so he's going to be talking, a little bit about what the book is about and some of the theories that he goes over with it. So excited about that. But anyway,
in case anybody's wondering, I'm literally learning this information as you're learning it. So these reactions are real. I think that's very exciting.
Yeah. And
I didn't know any of this prior to this moment.
I'm trying to talk Willie into going to some of the other ones as well, because it's a big deal to have a book come out. And
yeah, that's huge.
I mean, what he's talking about can be applied to any business, but because he knows student housing, he's using that as the target. And yeah, really cool. Haven't been able to read the whole thing. He was only able to send me, his publisher only would send a chapter to me, but so far I'm really enjoying it. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, that's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about beyond our borders. For those of you guys that follow me close on LinkedIn and some of our other social media outlets, you know that we were at the Interface conference recently, back in the middle of April, and I was able to come in, and because I love Interface and who it brings together, because a lot of times, we're so busy, especially when you start talking about C-suite and executives that really have a lot of experience within the student housing industry. This is kind of the one time of the year, maybe 2 times out of the year, that you're able to get that, expertise in the same room, under the same roof. And it just, it makes for some great discussion. And I was able to, we did it last year with 5 panelists that, had all started out at the site level and had ended up in the C-suite or again, an executive role. And that was, the audience loved that. It still continues to be the number 1 download. And so we said, hey, what can we do this year? And, this past year, student housing has, it's taken me to Canada. It's taken me to the UK. And because of that, it's also on the consulting side, it's also exposed me to a lot of things in regards to other countries. I've currently got a couple of clients that are in other countries that are sorting out deals and things that they want to do. So we're helping them with that. And I really, wanted to get some of the groups that are currently, I shouldn't even say currently, but student housing operators that are currently or recently have been working out of the United States, either as a consultant or a management company, and kind of get their insight on how that experience has been. And so we were able to get just a really stellar group. Scott Duckett with Campus Advantage, who, Campus Advantage went through a pretty long process with a deal in Russia that ultimately didn't end up happening, but I think it really kind of put a lot of things, on the roadmap of, okay, if you're going to expand your operations group to manage student housing outside of the U.S., here are the things you've got to think about. And so got some really great insight from Scott on that. Jake Jarman with Redstone Residential, they're currently in 3 different countries outside of the U.S. that they're operating outside of the U.S. So I had some really good input from Jake. And then Christine Richards with Greystar used to be with, or was part of EDR. And, EDR was not really focused in on international expansion. A lot of that was because they were a public company, which Christine goes into. But now with Greystar, because they were already operating student housing in Europe and the other parts of the world. So she's gotten a lot of recent insight on, kind of what it's like to step into that situation where, day one from that merger, they're now operating in other countries and, trying to come in and really create a best practices for each individual country and then across, the entire company. So that was a very cool insight. And then Beth Pinder with CA Ventures, which they're just, they are just kind of taking on that world. They own and operate everything themselves. They're not doing any third-party management. And so they were able to really bring in not just, the perspective of what it's like to to operate, but also go through that development and, that lease up process, and really kind of understanding what's going on with the students and how to pick their brain on things that they want. And last but not least, we did have our token British accent that everybody will pick up on of Dan Smith. And of course, Dan Smith has been a part of the Student Housing Insight, not the podcast, but our YouTube video, when I did a kind of an expose on what was going on with Unilodgers and their expansion into the U.S. And he was formerly with the Nido Collection, which did a lot of student housing, or is doing a lot of student housing in Europe. And he was the managing director of that. But now, actually, the kind of day one of Interface, he's no longer with the Nido Collection, although he stays very close with those guys. He has joined Unilodgers as their chief partnerships officer, I think is the way his title is listed. But so got, that unique perspective of not just how his firm was operating in London and throughout Europe, but also kind of what their perspective is of, these U.S. operators coming into their home country and operating. So
I think it's a great combo of people.
It was. I was really pleased with it, and excited for everybody to hear about it. But yeah, it was a great combo of people. I think it worked really well. And let's go on and press play on this. But I do want it for all the audience members, because I know we've got a lot of site level and regional level audience members that you're kind of at that point where you really want to experience a lot of things. And if you've ever thought, well, what can I do within student housing? I'm telling you, this is the time where there's great opportunities if you're working for a U.S. operator to be able to, or have experience in the U.S. of being able to go to these other countries and help them open up new properties, help them with that transition.
Exactly.
There's one comment in here about, everyone loves to go do the due diligence in these countries, but when you start asking about, are you ready to move there and commit 2 years to it, everybody kind of
backs away,
goes into the closet at that point. And man, I would encourage folks, if that's something that you've thought about doing, as far as going to another country and experiencing that, it's a great time to be in student housing. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for folks that can be mobile like that. But hey, let's go ahead and push play, and we'll catch up on some takeaways in the outro. Well, guys, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for taking some extra time at Interface. Interface seems to be the only time that we can get a group like this together under one roof and have a conversation like this. So appreciate you guys flying in a little bit early or driving in a little bit early to be able to do this. So thanks a lot for that. Really quick, just so our audience kind of has an understanding of the panel and what they've, where student housing has kind of taken you. Just give a quick intro and then talk about what countries student housing has taken you to, or what countries you're currently working in. Scott, I'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Scott Duckett. I'm the Executive Vice President at Campus Advantage. I've been in the industry now for 14 years and have had the pleasure to go to many countries for work purposes. So over the last 10 years, really, maybe 12 years, I've worked in Germany, Austria, the UK, had a very large project in Russia that went on several years. Worked in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Canada. And then we've had numerous conversations and exploratory discussions that didn't involve an actual trip with several countries in Europe, West Africa, and parts of South Asia.
Cool. Jake.
Jake Jarman with Redstone Residential. We're a small student housing management firm based out of Provo, which is about 45 minutes south of Salt Lake City, Utah. And we're in Brazil and Mexico and been to some other places, but our focus right now is in South America.
Great. Christine?
Chris Richards, Executive Director with Greystar, formerly was the Chief Operating Officer of EDR until we were acquired 6 months ago by Greystar. So global student housing is new. 18 years in the industry for me. And Greystar currently operates in Spain, the UK, and the Netherlands.
Great. Just a quick question before I go over to Beth. You mentioned EDR, that acquisition taking you guys into beyond our borders. Was that something that was on EDR's map prior to the acquisition at all? Or?
Globalization?
Yeah.
We had looked into it. It's just as a public company, it was very difficult, right, with currency and exchange rates and reporting and stuff. So we had backed away from it. But I did have the opportunity to meet the country leaders. I have not been able to actually visit the properties in the other countries, but I have had an opportunity in person to spend a day with our country leaders for each of the student housing divisions. And we'll discuss more of those takeaways as we go.
Yeah. Beth.
All right. I'm Beth Pinder, Chief Operating Officer, CA Ventures, based out of Chicago. I've been in student housing for 11 years. We are currently in South America, Canada. I've worked in Canada, South America, and we're getting ready to deliver in Poland. We have under contract in the UK, and so we're looking at Spain, Netherlands. So we're kind of in the beginning stages of our operating over there.
Great.
But we are actively operating in South America.
Great. Dan, you are the kind of odd duck in all of this because you're actually. I wanted to really have someone with a non-U.S. perspective, which you've been a part of an operations group operating in the UK. I'll have you say a little bit about that, but also just so everyone's aware, you've now kind of made that transition to then. I loved what your email said, to the light/dark side. Pick whichever one you want, to the supplier side. And now involved with Unilodgers, which we did you were part of a video that Student Housing Insight did for them back in November. But real quick, give a quick intro and what your background has been.
Sure. So I'm Dan Smith, and up until today, I was Managing Director of the Nido Collection, a student accommodation operator and owner with buildings throughout Europe, sort of 3,000 or so beds operational, another 5,000 in development. And up until today, that was the case. But now I am Chief Partnerships Officer at Unilodgers. We're a global student housing hub where students will come and book any sort of student rooms worldwide. We've got over 2 million rooms on our books. And it's my task to sort of oversee the global growth and the supply relationships worldwide. Student housing is a fascinating industry for me. I didn't have any prior experience until 4 years ago, and it's taken me to Colombia, to the US, to Canada, all throughout Europe as well. As I said, we've got development projects, we had development projects at the Nido Collection. So it's good to be here. Thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, great. So, guys, I guess kind of first question to the U.S. operators. I understand some of the reasons that I think those that are on the finance and investment side of our industry may be pressuring folks, operators, to go into other countries. But let's just ask the question: why in the hell are we doing it? What's so attractive about it? Is there anything attractive about it? Scott, I'll start with you as well. But I think what the audience is really looking for, and what I'm looking for, is what are the reasons behind other countries looking at the U.S. I know that we've been a leader in this for obvious reasons, but is there anything beyond just, hey, these are the guys that have been doing it so long, let's bring them here, and then beyond that, what's the attraction for a U.S. operator to look at expansion beyond our borders?
Great question. And I'm sure we all have different avenues at which we look at it. I think for us, starting way back early in like 2006, 2007, when we first started looking into these opportunities, it was a way to bring the model that we had created, or had been created here in the U.S., I should say, abroad. And with the understanding and the focus back then, if that is back then, 10, 12 years ago, of needing a way to cater to international students at the time. And I think that's probably still true today. Although what I've seen change in that time period, particularly in Europe is a great example, but there's been an explosion with Asia as well, is the model in Europe was a lot of folks went to college or university in their local town, so they lived with mom and dad while they were there. And so when we were exploring these opportunities, it was about the international students that would come to a particular university in Europe. But I think I've personally seen that change, and I think the data will back it up that there's more and more students moving around even within those countries or to other countries within, say, Europe. And then just the rise of students from Asia, all of Asia, going to what I typically say Western universities has exploded. So, I think some of it may have been personality too. Mike Peter, our president, CEO, and myself were Peace Corps volunteers many years ago, right out of college. And so we had the opportunity to live abroad and work abroad. And so for us, it wasn't a scary thing. It was something that we look forward to.
And you've got children currently that are studying.
I have two of my children are in school at university over in the UK, in Wales and Scotland. So I'm on the other side now as a parent. I know what it's like to send your child abroad and what you're looking for when you're doing that step. So it's been very helpful. But I think this, at least in my mind, this started as a way to cater to what globalization has brought, which is the transferability of students to different countries to get their education, and it's just it's been growing since.
Great. And I'll kind of leave that up to you guys if you want to add anything that may be a little bit different for you guys. Obviously, your perspective, Jake, is a much smaller company, certainly interested in understanding that. And then, Beth, with CA Ventures being very unique and how they're, kind of vertically integrated, because I'm assuming you guys are doing the development and everything for what you're doing abroad. You're not buying operating properties.
Correct.
So I'd like to kind of get that feedback from you guys.
So for us, I think originally we were getting quotes from other third parties. We were thinking there would be a learning curve. Maybe we would go that route at first, but the more we started to look at it and go over there and tour these markets and understand what's happening over there, we were kind of like, why not? We can do this. Yeah. We have a best-in-class student housing management firm. Yeah. So why wouldn't we do it? Yeah. So it was really, we've got our first deliveries in the UK in 2021. We figured that's enough time to do the research we need to do and figure out. And it's been very interesting because one of the reasons you wouldn't do it would be you would be scared that you don't know how it is over there, what the culture is like over there. But when you get over there, you kind of learn that there's little nuances and things that are different, but there really is a need for a higher level management services. So we do that. So to us, it was like, why not? Yeah. It was really that simple. Why wouldn't we do it? That's what we do.
Yeah. And you've got to feel like you can add some value to it.
100%. I think that was really the resounding thing that I came back with. I literally was over there, toured all up and down UK, all properties, met with students. I went to Wales. There's not a lot of data really necessarily in terms of how when we go to a market and we tour it and we kind of understand the demographic and we try to decide what we're going to build there, there's data, but it's not like that real life living experience. So we kind of I went to Wales, there wasn't a lot to tour. So I just went on the street where all the kids hang out and sat in bars and talked to kids from Wales to figure out, what do you want? What do you like? Really dig into their culture and listen, because I think one of the things that can happen is you can go into these markets and think, oh, well, I've been doing this for so long, I know what I'm doing. And I think that's very off-putting. So for me, we're in the beginning stages and it's just been more of a listen and learn mentality. And the more I listen, the more I learn. And I think the better that'll make us when we finally open up over there.
You're right. It's really, really important to put aside that ego and that arrogance of, hey, we're one of the largest operators in the US, and going over to Europe, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get, or anywhere else for that matter. But in Spain, for example, the majority of halls of residence, they will have catering, whereas in the UK, that's just not expected. So it's about going in, doing your research, but I think more importantly, as to what you said, is going and actually meeting your prospective customers.
Yeah, that's been the most fun, is really digging into these markets and meeting everybody, meeting the operators, even going and staying in them. Like I went to the Netherlands and stayed in the student hotel just because I wanted to see what that was like, you know? And that was really enlightening too. So I think we've got enough time and enough runway to really get there, but we're still learning what it's all about.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you're not opposed to doing any more focus groups at local bars as well. So
you can imagine what they must have thought of me. I'm like this Southern girl. I'm rolling up in there, and I'm like, "Hey, do you mind like sitting? I'll buy you a drink if you answer some questions for me." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
That's great. Jake, anything else?
So for us, I think that one of the reasons why we've gone abroad is for the excitement of it. How exciting is this to be pioneers in an area or in a country? And for me personally, I've lived out of the country for a number of years. I lived in the Dominican Republic when I was younger, and then lived in Spain for a number of years. And my partner Grant lived in Guatemala for a number of years. So for us, the language barrier and the new experience wasn't scary.
Yeah,
it's exciting. And exciting to be pioneers in these countries that are kind of lagging in terms of how much student housing or even the student housing experience or concept is brand new to them. So it's all very exciting.
So when we were at lunch, we had a little bit of a discussion on, especially when it came to South America, about systems. And that seems to be one of the biggest things. I know I've had conversations with Matt in the Bogota office. And that seems to be the biggest, I don't want to say obstacle, but just a pain point. So how are things like that being handled right now?
That's hard because we're used to one platform that we use for all of, we're exclusively Entrada. And I love Entrada. I consider myself an expert in it. And we have to use 6 different systems down there. One of them is a hotel operating system, simply because those were the best that we had at the time. Finding the systems and getting them integrated to work the way they work here has been a struggle.
Yeah.
So I've had South America for a year, and when I was sent down there to try to figure out what's going on, that was by far what I left there the most alarmed by was just the lack of systems and processes. I mean, operating out of Excel, like it was insane. So we actually do use Entrada over there, and that was one of the reasons why Matt went over there, was to get all of that up and running and get everything really moving and operating the way we should be operating, because that is a huge challenge over there.
Gotcha.
They don't know. I mean, you talk about going into a market where student housing isn't even a thing.
Right.
Like you literally are educating the entire market, country, and everything on what student housing is. And it's taken up until this year to finally get kids to understand that you can renew. Renewing is, they wouldn't even know what that is. They book weeks at a time. And so we are just now getting to the point in Chile where 70% of we are actually pre-leasing for the first time.
Okay.
So you have to teach the whole thing from scratch.
Gotcha.
Even the training over there, the language barrier is harder, obviously, than it is in Poland or in the UK. I mean, I've conducted entire training systems with a translator. It is so different there.
Yeah. Wow.
I think one of the issues that we found as NIDO students was that the system software providers, they follow the operators rather than actually pioneering themselves.
Sure.
And making sure that everything is set up and ready in multiple languages, multiple currencies, and the training is there and ready to roll out in Portugal, in South America, Colombia, wherever it may be. They're following us rather than actually pioneering themselves, and that's what we found is one of the biggest challenges, that we have to drag our software providers along with us.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, Chris, with the recent Greystar acquisition, that opened up a whole world to you guys. I've been to Greystar's London office, met with Neil Burton there, and a great advocate for student housing or student accommodation, as it's referred to there. What are some of the other, now that EDR has come into really kind of driving the student housing part of what Greystar is doing, that globalization that Greystar already had in place, are you guys finding any additional barriers to entry on any of those countries? Or
well, Greystar had a presence in significant presence in
Correct.
the UK, right? And then with the acquisition in 2017 of Resa in Spain, they had a significant presence there. So what they didn't have was a domestic presence, really, in student housing. 5 owned assets and a handful of managed accounts. So we just kind of gave them some, depth in the U.S. To kind of round out the portfolio, I guess.
So in a lot of ways, I guess it's been more of you guys learning how they're doing it in other countries. And
we've
spent
time, right? All kind of 4 countries that are operating student, kind of talking through best practices, right? Not necessarily the U.S. teaching them, right? But just learning from each other. How does everybody do it? What are the nuances and the differences? The leasing by the week versus, leasing in installments for the year or something. I think it's a fantastic collaboration, right? So we can learn best practices, but more importantly, what I've kind of learned out of the whole conversations are that our students or our customers are exactly the same.
Yeah.
Whether I'm in the UK or in Texas, I'm dealing with mental health issues.
Yeah.
Right? And whether or not I'm in the Netherlands or in Spain, I've got packages being delivered by Amazon where I don't have the real estate to hold them.
Yeah.
So I think that's been the most, I guess my takeaway from our discussions with those kind of student country leaders has been basically the folks we're dealing with, right? The customer issues are all the same.
Yeah.
No matter where we are, across the world. It's all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
The systematic, the software, the language barrier.
What's been the most surprising thing as you have? I mean, I've spent some time in the UK and Canada this past year and seen some big differences in the UK versus the way that we do it here. But for that whole process of understanding Greystar's portfolio and being part of that process of discussing best practices, what's been one of the things that have just stood out in your mind of, wow, I never even thought of it that way, or wow, that's just really interesting?
I think really it's shared resources, right? Like I didn't realize how fortunate we were for the amount of professional organizations and resources that we have to kind of guide us, right? So if you're struggling with, and mental health seems to be a hot topic. If I'm struggling with mental health, I can go to Akuho, which is now Akuhoai, so they do have international locations, but I can go to them as a resource, right? Whereas my peers in other countries didn't have access to that resource because they didn't know about it.
Yeah.
So I think it's really the professional support that we have, from the National Apartment Association, that perhaps they don't have the resources we have.
Gotcha. Great. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, I know employees from all of your companies, and it seems like a great culture at all of the companies. And I kind of put myself in their feet of thinking, especially if it's a company that, is just kind of announcing that they're going into other countries for student housing. From a culture standpoint, did you guys have any fears on how that may change the inner workings of your company culture?
Well, the one thing I saw is when we would announce internally that we were potentially going into this country or that country, there'd be a lot of excitement. People like, oh, I'll volunteer.
How can I do due diligence? That's the question. Yeah.
Going to Jamaica?
And then when it came time to actually say who's willing to move and relocate for 6 months, it was a completely different story.
Yeah.
So I think, that's something, a little nuance internally, because it sounds very appealing to a lot of people, but then the reality of picking up and moving is much more different. And I think the people that have gone abroad and participated, most of our work, I should say, has been in a consulting format. So very little in terms of actual operating on the ground. But for the folks who have gone, they've really appreciated it, and they've found that it's a lot more work. I think this the glamour, sounds great, but in Europe, I'll give credit to our European friends. They work long hours, and the first week over there, I think we worked nothing short of 12 or 14-hour days every day. Traveled at the beginning and ends of those days, so it's a lot of grueling work, and at the same time a lot of data collection. So I think that's something that folks need to keep in mind is it's not a free vacation.
I've come to Austin for a holiday. So.
Well, I know Dan's here. He's down on 6th Street tonight. No, but it's a lot of work, and the work is another level up, as I think Beth was alluding to. It's you got this language issue going on, so you're trying to decipher language, and then terminology is different. And one of the first tasks I did was try to put together a budget for a project in Austria. Well. I'm sitting next to an operator from Salzburg, and we're comparing, what are these different things in a budget? And there's so many nuances. It's like, what do you mean value-added tax, VAT? What's this all about? And so there's a lot to it. So I think
not to mention the currency exchange, right? And you're trying to figure that out.
And then employment is huge. Yeah. Employment varies greatly by country, in terms of laws and what you actually pay as the employer and everything else. Yeah. So I think that's one thing is that, it is appealing and it's fun. We're pioneers, we're out there on the front end of things, but it is also a lot of work. So
I think something that's kind of interesting in our space, what you were talking about earlier, like all of like the leadership on my team, they all started as CAs, like when they were 18 years old. So they're 15 years in and they're in their 30s, they're not married, they don't have kids, So the people that have the most experience to go over there and do these things really are, to your point, in an unbelievable position to take those leaps. I was fortunate enough when we decided to take South America in-house to have Matt, who wanted to move over there. So he took he's going to do the 2 years and get everything stabilized, and I think he'll probably then go to Europe. And then I have Nick, who also in his 30s took his family and his child and moved to London for 2 years to help me get the management company started there. But Scott's right, like it takes a very special person to be willing to like just change your life like that. But it was also very important to us at CA to have someone that understands the CA way, so to speak, there, getting things off the ground with the intention to then build it from Europe, from South America. I mean, everybody that works in South America is from there. I sent Matt and then Miguel, who's one of my regional sales support, who happens to be from Barranquilla, so it was perfect. Like, I'm like, okay, you guys, just go over there, get it done, and they're getting it done. And so now Nick and his wife Erin are over there, and they're going to help us get the management going over on that side, and then Matt will go there. So it has been, I've been very fortunate to have people who are willing to go and make that sacrifice, but it's a big one.
Yeah, it's great that you're, and his wife, and it's because it is.
Well, she actually used to work with us too, and so it was an opportunity to hire her again. Cool. And kind of have some skin in the game. I think as going over there as a couple, they're going to probably get a whole lot more done and a lot more supporting each other and all of that. So it's been very exciting, but to speak to your cultural question, it's everybody else is seeing this, like everybody in the field, we're talking the talk, and we're walking the walk. We say, we're doing this for, opportunity, and they're actually seeing it happen. Yeah. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool. So we talked a little bit about, obviously, the PMP. Is there anything that you guys are seeing as you've experienced this? And this is probably more of a question for you two because you're so probably a lot more active in it than the rest of us. Greystar's got a wonderful infrastructure in place for what's already happening in these other countries, and you guys are kind of living this out a little bit more day to day right now. I think I was communicating with Matt, and he was in Poland with you, and this was just a couple of weeks ago. So I know you guys are kind of in the thick of it. But are there things that you're looking at? Maybe not necessarily as an obstacle, but it's definitely something that you're saying, okay, this is what we're going to have to do different in these other countries.
Employment law was mentioned, and in Brazil, we're finding that we can't necessarily easily employ our CAs. If they're living there on site, it's harder to employ them than if they were living off site. So we're working with local attorneys, but we've seen that in other countries as well, where we're operating, where employment law is so different and unique from what we're accustomed to here in the United States. And so it definitely creates some challenges operationally how you would normally do it. And I'm saying, well, just hire these people. Yeah. She seems amazing. She's happy. She lives here. Yeah. Let's just hire her. Like, it's not that easy, Jake. Yeah. So we've definitely seen some cultural differences,
particularly
specifically
in South America,
down there.
That is one for sure. I think a broader answer is like everything's different, but to Chris's point, everything's the same. The nuts and bolts of what we do is the same, but there's even in the UK, I mean, it's such a fragmented market. It's like the United States is the United States, and we're student housing. You could go Glasgow, Edinburgh, Leeds, Sheffield. I mean, it is so fragmented. Like you have to learn every little nuance about every little area, and it's all different. And so that's why you have to be, it's kind of like going back to that whole grassroots way of like learning your markets. You just got to get in there and you got to learn it. And for me personally, if I'm going to operate it, I want to learn it. Yeah. So I'm going myself to figure out how we're going to do this and what we need to do different. And I don't know all the answers to even answer what is different. I just know that there's a lot of things that are. And as I meet with like even your company using broker type deals over there, there's so many nuances. I mean, that's the longest list is what's different. What we're going to do, I mean, we're going to do the same thing we do here, and we're going to provide a level of service and experience that I think that if you look at what's happening in the UK, the brands that are really focusing in on experience and the sophisticated services and things like that, they're the ones that are kind of rising to the top. Yeah. So there's obviously that works there, and that's what we do here. So we're just going to take what we do here and do it over there.
Great.
I think what Greystar has kind of done, right, because not only is student kind of global, but multifamily is global too, and they've come to kind of the realization that there are some things that there are no borders on, and there are some things that there are borders on, right? So talent management, technology, risk management, PR, what things have to be kind of country specific or even kind of locality specific, and what things can be global. And they've put together a global practices team, right? Where there's kind of a lead for all of the major areas across the company to see where we can, where can we systematically do the same thing and where can we not? Gotcha. And that has been interesting to start watching it kind of unfold, and how it changes, because it changes things domestically, right? As well. If we figure out there's a global practice that we can use worldwide, then that's going to change domestically how we do things too. Yeah.
Anything specific? There's, for example, my trip to UK back in November. I was amazed at how centrally managed those properties are, to the point that things like brokers and referral services make so much more sense there than they ever have here. But I also kind of look at that and start thinking about what kind of impact that would end up having on, if we were to adopt something very similar here, what kind of impact that has on the P&L of the properties, right? Are there things that you guys are picking up that you're saying, well, maybe this is the way we should have done it here?
Isn't that footprint, though? I mean, if you look at the U.S., for the most part, our products serve a four-year institution, a specific four-year institution, right? So if I'm going to build in State College, Pennsylvania, I'm going to serve that one particular institution. But if I'm in London, I might be serving 85 different universities, right? Yeah. And so, and my international population at State College might be 5%, whereas my international population in the UK may be 35% or something. And so I think those types of services are kind of dependent upon what it is, who it is we're actually servicing.
It depends on, I mean, as the supply has increased year on year in the UK, I mean, there are certain cities that you would say are saturated, the likes of Liverpool, Newcastle, Glasgow to a certain extent now, in certain places will be fairly saturated. Sheffield, there's more I could go on. I don't want to scare you, Beth. But,
no, I've been all no, exactly. But I was going to say Sheffield.
Exactly, yeah. But that's where someone like Unilodgers can come in and say, right, you will have voids. The likelihood is you will have voids in these cities if you don't work with, the likes of a marketplace or a student housing booking hub, because of the fact that we know that there will be voids. We can come in and say, well, just give us those rooms ultimately, and we will make sure that we assist you with your leasing throughout the course of the year. It'll allow you to plan that bit better, give you higher occupancy throughout the year, and that's why it was important for me when I was with Nido to work with the agents, consolidators, marketplaces, whatever you want to call them, to get those levels of occupancy up, because it's not shooting fish in a barrel anymore. Excuse the idiom, but
we
yeah,
get it.
Yeah, but yeah, it's getting harder and harder to get to 100% occupancy, and investors are still as demanding as they ever were, 5-10 years ago. It's just that there are more and more beds creeping up every single year. In Glasgow, for example, there's 500 beds being built directly next to one of the buildings for Nido. That will definitely have an impact. In London, for example, Wembley has just taken off, and there's 5,000 beds there that have just popped up virtually over the last 2 years. That's had an impact on the West Hampstead asset. But we've managed to make sure that we get that to full occupancy and get the other buildings to as close to full occupancy as we possibly can by using the likes of Unilodgers, other marketplaces, and various other agents as well. It's about having a very diversified sales funnel. That's absolutely key.
I understand that on the sales standpoint, and the other thing I'm thinking about is with those types of numbers that are increasing in the UK. What's the largest property out of those 5,000 that you mentioned?
Probably about 750 beds.
Any idea on what the staff, the on-site staff, actually looks like at that property?
Yes, there'll be around sort of eight or so people. It depends where that asset would be within the market. You'll see some operators use a skeleton staff and just have one general manager, and then maybe operate the rest on community ambassadors, resident ambassadors, whatever you want to call them, that are students that kind of live there. There'll be a maintenance operative on call or something, and then a housekeeping team here and there. Yeah. And then you get somewhere there are 20 odd people within there, and there's 2 people in the sales and marketing team, and then there are some resident assistants as well that are full time. A front of house manager if they're treating it like sort of hospitality and leisure. It really, really varies. But yeah, typically 750 beds, you're looking at about 8 people or so.
Well, and the core of my question to that was really based on, when I see how things were managed in the UK, specifically in London, because to be fair, I didn't really get outside of London, but it seems very, very centrally managed at the corporate offices, and I was actually amazed at how well things operated. I don't know that would necessarily happen here in the U.S. It makes me very nervous to even think about that few staff members at some of these properties. But the other thing is, I spent some time in Canada this summer, and most of those properties, have weekly in-suite cleaning, and I was amazed at how low the turnover cost was. Now, don't get me wrong, you're paying for that throughout the year, but also how well a 5-year-old property looked in Canada with that type of weekly cleaning that was happening that we're typically used to seeing at a lot of P3 type projects. The asset was in remarkable condition, and they literally most of the properties that I was working with, they're and some of you guys know this, but the turnover was literally like 24 hours in the summer between last day of August and first day of September. So, and that couldn't be done, without having that weekly cleaning. So anyway, what I'm getting at is there are a lot of those type of things that I've seen that I'm thinking, okay, that makes a lot of sense. How obviously you guys are going through a kind of a best practices exercise of figuring that stuff out at Greystar. But are there things that you guys are seeing like that you feel like we've got to, as U.S. operators, we've got to take a deeper look at?
I mean, I was not prepared for what you just mentioned, the fact that every single property that we manage has house cleaning. Yeah. And, that's unique, I think, to a lot of markets here in the United States, but it's very commonplace in other areas of the world. And that's just built into it. And I said, hey, we're not going to do this. And they said, we don't care what you think, we're doing it. Because that's how we grew up. That's how things are here in this country. And you have to change that mindset and be willing to say, okay, culturally, this may not fit within my budget or within my paradigm, but it fits within theirs. And so I need to be able to be willing to change my paradigm to match that culture.
Gotcha. Anything else?
I mean, when you look at Spain, for example, Spain has Spain's quite notorious in that the students are very particular. So we had a good look at Spain, Portugal. We sort of merged the two together into an Iberia, and in Spain they expect their linen to be done. They expect sometimes they will expect they'll always expect food. They'll expect daily cleans.
Cake at 4:00.
Yeah,
I've been told.
Genuinely.
Cake at 4:00.
Yeah, and that's great for the community level, but it's not so great for your bottom line. When you start thinking about all of the extra services that you're starting to add in, typically anywhere in the world, beds are beds. You can operate, you could put me into the States and I would be able to operate a building. I wouldn't necessarily know the market inside and out, so I'd have to do a fair bit of research, as you're doing, Beth. And I think it's really important that whenever you go to a new country, that you are doing a huge amount of research. You're talking to the students. You know those little nuances, whether it be, okay, you have to change the linen on a daily basis. You have to do a daily clean. You can't just clean up to the apartment door. You have to go right inside and almost treat it like a hotel. Mm-hmm. That is really, really important, but it really does add to the costs. And when you've got an investor or stakeholders, shareholders, whatever, and they're expecting a certain NOI, it gets really challenging when you go to Spain and that NOI just gets further and further away from where you originally wanted it to be. Yeah. Because the UK or the US, it may be fairly set and it's quite simple. There might not be any particular extras that would normally be added on. Whereas somewhere like Spain, somewhere like Colombia, for example, where I did a lot of looking into 7 assets in Colombia, and the costs were just staggering, to the point where we had to kind of pull away and say, I can't make the figures work for this particular investor. So maybe we could try and find another one, maybe not. But that's one of the real challenges that we found. Finding the investors that are going to understand that you move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, country to country, you are going to find that the NOI and therefore the IRR and the investor rate return is going to be significantly different.
And Dan, this is kind of a question. This is kind of the main question I wanted to ask you, but then to also kind of get everyone else's feedback on what they've experienced. But you've been an operator in the UK, and obviously you've seen the likes of these other companies coming into the UK. What's the general take, not just necessarily your previous company, but other operators, when they see a company that's coming in from the US to begin operations? And for the rest of you, the countries that you've gone into, what's been the relationship with current operators that are in those countries? I mean, everybody's smiling.
Wait a minute. Go ahead, please.
See what you say.
Most competition is good competition, is what I would say. I mean, Greystar actually bought the previous Nido buildings. Before I started, I was drafted in when Greystar had bought 3 spectacular premium student accommodation buildings in central London, which have then been turned into the Chapter brand. So it was my job to kind of take the brand from scratch again and grow and build it from there. What you kind of, I suppose, what you hope is that any kind of competitor will come in thinking they know it all and learn a few lessons along the way. And I know a few of them have. They've eaten a bit of humble pie and they've learned. And there are various things that they're putting in place now that will certainly assist with the global rollout. In terms of how UK operators in particular feel about it, or European operators. It's a challenge. Every city is now, because it's a very different market to the US, every city now has pockets of saturation. And as I said before, parts of Sheffield, Newcastle, Glasgow, various other places, there's bits of London as well. It is becoming more and more of a challenge. And so one of the key things is that I then I had to kind of learn to be able to adjust the investor expectations and therefore adjust the underwriting and make sure that there is a very honest communication. Now, everybody, I think, is now aware that you just won't get the 100% occupancy levels that you would have done 5 years ago. Just before I joined the student accommodation industry, they were having a great time. It was literally build it and they will come. It genuinely was. You could pretty much put student accommodation anywhere and it would fill. And now it's very much not the case. You've got to focus on your brand. You've got to listen to your residents. you've got to think about the experience and the community. You've got to think about Generation Z and, you know, how focused they are on the personalization and, you know, instantaneous communication and sustainability and also mental health and well-being. Chris, you said earlier, it is absolutely key that we are looking after those students. And so there are a lot of lessons that you know can be learned along the way. I could summarize those in you know pretty much an hour, to be honest with you. But so yeah, come and find me later. But I think the operators that have come in have learnt good lessons and are putting those into practice. So you know it's just bringing the standard of accommodation up. Yes, it's driving the rents up, but at the same time, you know, that is just the nature of the beast, I think. So, yeah.
I think it's what Beth said earlier, right? So when I was looking through that question, in like all capital letters, I wrote, listen.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Listen and then change.
Yeah.
Because change is makes people uneasy, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to come in, if U.S. operators to come in and just say, we're going to change this, this, and this, because this is the way we do it, right? That's going to make people uneasy. Stop and listen first.
Yeah.
Right? Before you start implementing change. Right? And I think it's small steps. I mean, I was with the kind of country leader for Spain last week, and we were just kind of brainstorming, right? Yeah. This is the way they do it. And I said, well, what about this? Right? Have you thought about adding premiums to these units on these floors, right? If you're trying to grow revenue.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be across the board rate increases. Right. It could be small steps. Aha, good idea.
Yeah.
So listen, right, to what they have to say, and then throw out an idea, and small shifts in implementation. I don't think it has to be kind of an overhaul.
Yeah.
And so how good you are at that, right? Listening to what the people, you know, are currently doing and how they're operating. You won't mess up the HR or hiring the CA, you know, and screwing that up, right? Just listen.
Yeah.
I think you have to be humble, right? Because if you're the feedback that I've received is, you know, we don't want to think of you as the evil American overlords coming here to take our jobs and tell us what to do.
These are competitors, or these?
No, this is employees saying, look, we love what you're doing and love what you're saying, but you've got to, you can't be so excited about this, Jake. And I'm like, too bad. I'm always excited.
Yeah, I don't know what.
Right? Yeah. But you have to be humble and work with them, because if not, they do start to feel a little bit of resentment that, you know, they're coming from another country and telling me what to do in my country. That's hard. And so there needs to be that element of the humble pie that you mentioned, helping them see this is why we do things this way. And if you can think of another way to do it that works within, the framework of what we're trying to create here, then that's fine. But you have to be humble. Otherwise, they do start to say, who's this weirdo?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think another angle that I took your question maybe slightly differently, and that's, you know, how are we being perceived? And when I say I took it differently, I mean a lot of the work that we've done, whether it's been stimulated by a private developer's interest, has generally come back to be something that we're involved with the local university on. And in most cases, the local universities are welcoming these types of things. And if you want to take that to a higher level, you know, you can say, well, it's all about competition, right? In order to attract international students that want to come to my campus, I have to have nice accommodations to offer them, or they're going to choose my competitor. And so I think the key, at least in the majority of the cases that we've worked on, is establishing a good relationship with the university so they see it, and then trying to share that. So when you're working with a local operator who may feel threatened, present it as an opportunity for them and their university to grow. And it's keeping them competitive, it's keeping them up to speed on what's happening and the way the world's changing. And I think, big picture, that's what a lot of it boils down to as well, because education is a business. We're exporting education here in the West, and the US and UK and Australia. And so we've worked with, in fact, we did a work study trip with the Kuhoi through China, and some of the work we did in Russia, there was so much of a focus on university rankings and wanting to be, move up those rankings so they can attract more students to that campus. And housing's a part of that. And not just housing, because a lot of times housing spills over into, well, how do you market? How do you market yourself, the university and the housing? What are your policies around some of the cultural pieces on campus, and how can your housing be integrated with the university operations, even if it's a private off-campus facility? there can still be a dovetail connection there between the two. So
let me ask you this question, Scott, and Chris, I think you probably got some good insight on this too. Where do you see the biggest opportunity at? Is it in these other countries? Is it from kind of what we call a P3, a public-private partnership here in the States? Is it more of that working with those foreign universities, or is it on the private side where we're going in and providing?
Not having done research to answer this with
sure.
data, I would say it really depends on the economic status of the country. I think a lot of growing countries that are in the growth phase, you're probably looking at more of a relationship with the university, with a government entity, versus the more seasoned countries in terms of their economy. You're probably looking at more private opportunities.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, definitely. Within, I've had a look at Central Europe, Southern Europe as well. The markets aren't quite as mature, and that's when you can get in there with the universities. When you take the UK, for example, where it's a super competitive market with PBSA, the difficulty is that the universities, they don't need us anymore.
Right.
When it was just the likes of Unite, our largest provider, or Liberty Living, for example, one of the sort of top 5 providers, when it was just them, and PBSA was a very new sort of phenomenon for universities, they would take nominations agreements, group bookings in those buildings just to get the beds in, so that they could say to international students, you can have a lovely room. Look at this common space. Whereas in their own halls of residence, you've just got a box room. Here's your key. We'll see you in 51 weeks. And now with PBSA, or rather, sort of 5 years ago or so, they had the common room, all the amenities they could possibly want, a gym, a karaoke room, things like that, and that was super important. As time has gone on, some of them have been stung. Some of the universities have been stung by not filling their nominations agreements and shelling out hundreds of thousands of pounds on empty rooms that they just couldn't fill as the sort of demand has waned, and there's quite a lot of fluctuation in the UK at the moment. And so the universities now, it's very, very difficult in the UK to get in there and get a partnership with them. So the best you can really hope for, unless you are right next to campus or right next to a faculty, is to get a referral agreement, or at least get listed on their website. And it's that, again, was another sort of real difficulty for any kind of private provider, and will be for any private provider coming in to the market, thinking, well, I'll just go and talk to the university, and surely they'll give us, maybe a 1,000-bed nomination, and that's, 2 buildings full. It just doesn't work like that anymore. It did 5 years ago, but the market's moved on so much, and that will happen in Spain, that will happen in France, that will happen probably in about 50 years in Italy. But there are various other markets where it's just starting to sort of creep up. The universities are realising we don't have to take this risk, we don't have to do these partnerships. We can just say, there's loads of great accommodation options. So I think it's really important to know that before you get into that market.
In the conversations we've had around kind of the US P3 model, right, is that it is my understanding that the accommodations on these campuses, right, the reason that they were reaching out and master leasing or master booking to the private institutions for the nice accommodations is because the stuff on campus was not that nice, right? It was not in that great of condition, which is exactly the condition that happened in the US, right? The universities can build. I mean, they know how to do all that, right? But they don't have the money for it, and their accommodations are kind of in dilapidated conditions, which is what has opened up kind of the world of P3s, right? We come in with the expertise, but we also have the money, and we can give them the new beautiful accommodations that then help them in their marketing and their enrollment growth. And my understanding is that it's similar, across the globe. They just don't put the money into the accommodations because their mission is academics.
It is.
Right? Whether you're in Spain or whether in the US, the university's ultimate mission is academics, and the additional services that we offer are just part of it, but not their ultimate mission.
We've seen a lot of universities in the UK sell off big accommodation portfolios, the likes of Aston, the likes of Southampton, Solent. Aston sold sort of for £269 million their portfolio right next to their campus. And that is a measure of the fact that they don't get the assistance from the government anymore. Things have changed so much for them. Tuition fees aren't guaranteed, and it looks likely that they may drop. There's a possibility that they may drop, at which point some courses will run at a loss. It's going to be a really challenging time, particularly in the UK. But yeah, Europe will also start to feel the pinch on that too, I think.
So I think that's similar, right? The monetization of on-campus housing in the U.S. is starting to become, at least showing up in RFPs and stuff, and you're seeing it across the globe.
Great. Well, fantastic. Well, guys, I could probably carry on this conversation for a couple more hours, but I don't think we'll be able to keep our audience.
They're going to drift off.
Yeah. So, but I do like to kind of end these panel discussions with a quick fire round. Some of it is funny, and some of it maybe there will be some benefit that someone will get out of it. So these are, which do you personally prefer? Doesn't mean what your company requires or anything like that, but what you personally prefer. So, and there's a reason for this first one that I've asked about: iPhone or Android. So, Scott, I'll start with you, and we'll go through.
Boy, should I mull this over a while? iPhone.
Yeah.
iPhone.
Gotcha.
iPhone.
Yeah, iPhone.
Okay. Main reason I was asking is just from an international standpoint. I didn't know if you're finding it easier or harder to use one platform over the other as you travel. So, all right, we'll start with you this time, Dan. Country music or hip hop?
Do you know what? I'm going to go country music.
It's pandering.
I'm going hip hop.
Country music.
Country.
All right, Scott. New development or acquisition?
Acquisition.
Because the property management fees are higher? Or?
No, since you don't have to worry about delays, you don't have to worry about...
You have a phone number.
You have a phone number. You have an office.
You have an
They
address.
take over, you got a building. Just make sure you got a team there, and you're good to go.
All right, go for it, Jake.
Acquisitions.
Acquisition.
New development.
Yeah, new development. I like taking something from scratch and building it up.
Okay. I don't know if I'll have to do any explanation for this one or not, but let me know. Golf or cornhole?
Cool. Is that where you get like a beanbag? And golf. Barely a sport anyway, but still.
Definitely cornhole.
Golf.
Cornhole.
Brilliant.
You should have said football.
I figured with none of the folks actually at the golf tournament today, it would all be cornhole, but maybe you guys just didn't know about the golf tournament. All right, Scott, yoga or CrossFit?
CrossFit.
Yoga.
Neither.
Yeah.
Yeah, neither.
All right, Uber or Lyft?
Uber. I don't think we have Lyft yet in the UK.
Okay.
Uber.
Lyft.
Although, my God, those scooters here.
Oh,
They
I
are
know.
lethal, aren't they?
They're doing that while they're drinking.
I have no idea.
That was a good term.
I saw them buzzing around last night.
They haven't made it to the UK yet. It's only a matter of weeks, I'm sure.
Well, we'll take care of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues with those, especially when it comes to ADA accessibility, because they get left out on the sidewalks and that kind of thing. So, Scott, I followed you throughout your career. We've known each other throughout our career, and I know you've been on both sides of this. So, operations or business development?
There's no good answer there. Can I just plead the fifth?
Say both.
Yeah, I like both. I like they're intertwined. So whatever you're selling, you got to deliver.
Absolutely.
I think both are hunting, and one is hunting for the deals, and the other one is hunting for leases.
Yeah.
So I prefer operations, though.
Yeah.
Sell me some leases.
I say both.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other.
Oh, wow. Really
We'd all be good in politics, wouldn't we? Dodging your question.
All right. Dan, YouTube or podcasts?
Podcasts.
YouTube, definitely. Except for your podcast, of course.
That's what we're doing this on YouTube as well, so you actually
that's
watch
right,
it.
I forgot.
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube.
All right. Sitcom or drama?
Drama.
Sitcom.
Sitcom.
Drama.
Gotcha. All right. So make sure that you're historically correct in this answer, because by the time this comes out, the NCAA tournament will have already be over with. Okay. Tonight, the first night of interface is also the championship game. So, Scott, I'll actually start with you this time. Yeah. No, let's start with Dan. Since he's probably had to do a lot of research on this. So for the basketball, NCAA basketball tournament championship tonight, Texas Tech or UVA?
Well, we're in Austin. I'm gonna go Texas Tech.
All right.
There you go.
I'm going UVA.
UVA.
Texas Tech.
All right. Well, guys, again, I appreciate it so much for you guys taking the extra time, and I hope that this will be a benefit to the audience. So with that being said, thanks again, and I hope you guys will join me on another podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us.
All right. Well, there you have it. Thanks for everybody that has kind of stuck it out that 40 minutes or so of that interview with the panel. But again, I think this is one of those that kind of really ranks up there, at least for me, being able to have that conversation with everybody. But Greta, what's some of the takeaways you have?
So it's funny because I felt like this was a really, really fascinating podcast. And I think that's one adjective I have not used yet. And there were a couple of reasons for that. So one is you said something before we went into the actual podcast portion of it. And it was, the experience that for on-site team members, for regional managers, that they can potentially, go into by joining a company or by being with a company, or just by being in student housing and being able to possibly be a part of this experience. And I just kind of want to reiterate that for a couple of reasons. And it goes into one of the key takeaways that I had from this. And it was really that it isn't just, yes, it's amazing. And, everybody should be able to have that opportunity to live abroad, travel abroad first off, but to live abroad and to really, be able to completely immerse yourself in another culture, another environment, all of those things, right? That's an incredible life experience. But additionally, there was this whole part that just honestly captured me. And I've talked a lot in the podcast about one of the things that I enjoy about listening to people speak is what happens to your brain and the ideas that can kind of start to go, your brain will just start firing off in different directions. And that was one of the things that happened while I was listening about how when you're doing the market analysis in another country, that you can't just go and tour their properties when you're doing this, that you have to, fully...
You have to go to bars.
Yes. That, when she was in Wales and going and, drinking with these students or, whatever the case may be. And we do that now. I mean, you've been, we've gone to do these market analysis together and, really fully, to use this word again, to immerse yourself in a market. And that's something to be done. And so there were two things that I thought about that. And one is what an incredible experience that is. And I was so excited by that thought of it not just being another market, right? Another American market where you're just going, you have to tour the comps and you're going to go to the school and the university, you're going to drive around town and right. Because we do the same thing every single time. I've said that before. Like I go and I do the exact same thing every single time I go. And then I look at the same websites and I gather all the same information and I have this all down to a system. But to go someplace else where that system has to be thrown away and you have to do something entirely different. Oh my gosh, I can't even express to you how excited I was by that thought process, by that possibility. Yeah. And so from the perspective of being, an on-site team member or any regional position or a marketing person, and to gain that experience of you went someplace else and you did market analysis on a market where you couldn't just follow the standard format for doing this. Think about how that would make you think differently when you do a market analysis back in the States.
Well, yeah, I mean, because and I could tell you that from my experiences this past summer, because there's not a lot of differences between Canada and the U.S. as far as culture is concerned, but there's enough when you're talking about the way the universities and colleges operate, and just kind of what's important to students that are in that demographic. And you know how it is. We could go to any tier 1, tier 2 Southeast school in the U.S. and it doesn't take us that long. I mean, I feel like I'm almost to the point. Well, I was until I went to Canada. I felt like I could stick my nose up in the air when I landed somewhere and figure it out. And 90% of my initial assumptions were automatically true. And going to Canada and going through that experience, that wasn't the case. I learned some things pretty quick that I was like, oh yeah, that's not going to work here. And, that has, with one of the most recent, it wasn't a Southeast university, but was more of a Midwest university that I did a recent analysis on. And, I went in a little bit more eyes wide open after what I experienced in Canada. So
exactly. That's all. It was like, I wished that I was there for that, because that was one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, it was like, did this change, or have you taken those lessons of, how you had to approach these markets and trickled that down to the rest of your marketing team? And has that changed how they approached their market analysis, for the development team? How has that changed how you bring this information in? And so that experience is, I just can't even, I obviously can't even make words.
It's unique. And like we said, there are folks that have got some really unique opportunities to help those companies that are expanding, be a part of that I think is going to pay off dividends, for their career in this industry. So I would certainly suggest, I'm a big advocate for people who want to do that. And I wish I could have done it. I'm doing it a little bit now, but nowhere to, 4 kids that are 13 to 3, there's no way that, I could ever convince my wife, hey, let's go move to Bogota, or, it's just not going to happen. So yeah, I think that's a very unique opportunity for a lot of folks. But other takeaways, I feel like.
Yes, there were 2 others, and they weren't as big. They weren't as gripping as that. It was really that the other 2 were, one, I thought it was so interesting that, and I think there were more of things that we don't necessarily think about when we think about, doing student housing overseas. And the first one was the lack of systems, policies, and procedures, which just, I'm like, how much those things matter to me. Like, I need them. I want them. I have to have them. If they don't exist, I will make them. And so it was like, as soon as that was said, I was like, oh, that's so necessary. It was like, those things have to be in place. You're doing everything off of Excel? Absolutely not. Like, a system has to be there. But then also the thing that I thought was so interesting, because it's so obvious, but it doesn't just immediately occur to you when you think about it, which is that all of the systems. And so it was, they talked about Entrada and having to think about the different currencies and the different languages, and that this has to be, that there's many that would have to all be included. And it's like, oh, well, duh. But you don't just immediately think about that when you're thinking about the fact that you're going to have to go someplace else. So it's like, from the very beginning, there are so many things that are going to be so different and challenging and new than what you're used to. It isn't a matter of just saying, we're going to take our product that we build all the time, these 4 walls with these amenities, and go transplant it into another country, because it isn't that simple. It isn't just, oh, we just have to find their university and slightly alter it to that student body and understand their rental laws, or whatever the housing laws, whatever the equivalency is. It isn't that. It isn't that at all. There's so much more. And I love that.
Yeah. The software part, the property management system part of it, that's
huge.
And then we've kind of gone through our own evolution. You mentioned Entrada, and, we've got, there's been a big migration that has happened with most of the student housing operators in the country moving over to Entrada. And, it's, anybody will tell you.
I totally stand.
Well, and, I'm not, look, we've had both RealPage and Entrada sponsors of the program. So, but they'll be the first ones to tell you that I don't necessarily, I'm going to tell them when they're missing something, right? And I'll call them out on it. But this was one that I couldn't really call either of them out. But I think Entrada kind of it just really kind of doubled up on them because they've got they have a few clients that are trying to go out of the country, and they're huge users here, and what do they do? And I think Entrada's done a great job of facilitating that, but I can tell you from firsthand experience that it still has a lot of kinks in it, as far as operating outside of
I'm sure
outside of the U.S. And I can't tell you that about RealPage or Yardi, or because I haven't used those systems outside of the U.S., but I have used Entrada. But I can't got a lot of sympathy for them because I just can't imagine just getting expense reports done, converting between the Canadian dollar and the U.S. dollar was I'm pretty sure someone still owes me money, but
oh my god,
it's not because they didn't try. It's just because between my bank and the day that it happened, there's definitely lost money there. So anyway, so any other takeaways?
No, those were the key ones. It's the biggest one obviously that gripped me, and then the two that I thought were just really interesting tidbits.
Well, guys, again, I'm glad that we were able to have this opportunity to go into interface, and thanks again to France Media and Rich Kelly and all the guys that put that conference on for allowing me to do this at the hotel. And I think it's second year in a row that we've done it, and we've already talked a little bit about some things to do at LeaseCon this year that's coming up in September.
Exciting!
And yeah, really looking forward to it. So, anything else we need to update our audience on?
No, I think that's everything.
Oh, come on now. Give them a little bit of an update of how the beta with the SHI.
I knew you were going to say that. So the beta is going really, really well. I am actually very, very excited because we did just implement a member-to-member chat system. And so that was something that you knew that I really wanted to implement within the SHI community. And so I did get that in place as of, was it yesterday? No, I think it was the day before.
I feel like it was today's Monday. Yeah, because it was either Friday night or Saturday sometime. You were texting me, and
I just remember it was late, and because I couldn't stop. I was obsessing, and like I do. And so I was very, very excited about that. So there is a messaging system that's inside of it where you can chat between other members. So I was really excited about that. And so it just continues throughout the month as things come to me, as feedback comes back from our beta members. There will be constant ongoing updates throughout. And so who knows what it'll look like by the time it makes it to the public. Maybe a completely different site. I mean, I don't know.
So,
but it is very exciting.
I know we did this last week. You gave everybody kind of a navigation lesson on how they could sign up. You mind doing that one more time?
Absolutely. So all you have to do is go to studenthousinginsight.com. That is the website. And in the upper right-hand corner, there is a new link and it says member login. And you click that and it's going to take you to the member login page, as one would expect. And obviously you do not have a current login. And so instead you'll click the sign up button and a new screen will appear and it will let you know that SHI Community is currently doing a phased rollout. And to go ahead and fill it out, which you can do. So put your first name, your last name, your company, your email address, and put in the password that you will like to use as soon as you are approved, and click that submit button. And that will come through. I will receive it. We'll receive it. And then we can get you potentially approved as a new beta member, and you can hop in and see everything that we keep talking about, as well as see my new very exciting member chat system.
Well, again, I know I said this last week. You've done an incredible job of designing the whole thing and putting it together. Thanks again. You are the Woz.
I appreciate it. Hopefully everybody else likes it.
Right.
But I do love the Woz.
Well, Greta, thanks again for for having to do a late night chat session on
SHI Late Night Edition
on Zencastr. Zencastr's not a sponsor of this, but in case you are looking,
I totally just led up to it like they were, though. Sponsored by Zencastr.
But in case you are, we do need to talk about the sponsors real quick. But in case you are interested in starting your own podcast, and you want to do really good recordings with those that you're interviewing online, that's not going to be sitting in front of you, I do highly recommend Zencastr. It's ZENCASTR.com. So yeah, and to be able to put this on an interface, it takes a lot of money to do it. So big thanks to our annual sponsors for our SHI summits that also sponsored this event as well. And Greta, have you got them in front of you?
As a matter of fact, because that's all I do is constantly have SHI stuff in front of me and on my laptop at all times these days. So we have Carter Young, Euphorus, Transpar, Simple Bills, Stellar, South Park Interiors, Leap, Allbridge, and F3. Thank you.
Yes, huge thanks to you guys. If you want to find out more about our sponsors, please go to our website at studenthousinginsight.com and scroll all the way towards the bottom, and you'll see links to them there. Yep. Greta, again, I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.